The hospital administrator slid the clipboard back across the counter without even looking up. Without valid insurance authorization, we require a $15,000 deposit before admission. Cash or certified check. Zora Ellington stood there, soaking wet, 9 months pregnant, her body seizing with contractions every 4 minutes, and this man in his pressed blue lanyard was talking to her about certified checks. "I have been a premium member of this network for 6 years," she said, keeping her voice flat and controlled, because if she let it crack, she would fall apart entirely. 6 years, MISO-B practices in this building. "Ma'am, your policy shows as suspended as of 48 hours ago. That is impossible. I understand this is frustrating. My daughter could die tonight." He finally looked up. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't cruelty. It was something almost worse. Bureaucratic indifference. But the look of a man who had learned to stop seeing the people standing in front of him. $15,000, he repeated. "Or we can refer you to County General." County General was 40 minutes away, in a November storm, while she was having contractions. If you had been standing in Zora's shoes, that night, insurance gone, money frozen, your unborn child's life measured in minutes, what would you have done? Before you answer, stay with me, because what happened in the next 60 seconds would unravel 3 years of lies, a dead man's secret, and a family empire built on keeping one woman from ever knowing she existed. If this kind of story keeps you up at night, the ones about power, family secrets, and the people who survive them, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. I tell these stories every week, and I never want you to miss one. And drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to that hospital door. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon, the kind of Pacific Northwest rain that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It simply arrives and stays, cold and insistent, as though it has nowhere better to be. By the time Zora Ellington's taxi pulled up to Crescent Harbor Medical Center, the sidewalk outside the emergency entrance had turned into a shallow river running between cigarette butts and discarded paper cups. She paid the driver with her phone because her wallet was inside her go bag, and reaching for it required bending in a way that was no longer possible. She had been timing the contractions since 6:15. It was now 7:42. She'd packed the bag 2 weeks ago, checked it twice, reviewed her birth plan with her OB doctor. Anaya Voss 3 times. Zora was the kind of woman who prepared for things. She had not prepared for this. The automatic doors opened with a gust of heated air, and she walked in carrying her bag on one shoulder, her soaked coat dripping onto the tile. She had her insurance card in her left hand. She had her ID in her right. She had her OB's direct number already pulled up on her phone. Everything she was supposed to have, she had. The woman at the admissions desk, mid-50s with reading glasses perched on her nose, glanced up when Zora approached. "Name Zora Ellington. I'm a patient of Dr. Anaya Voss. I'm 38 weeks, high risk, and my contractions are about 4 minutes apart." The woman typed without urgency. Zora put the insurance card on the counter. The woman picked it up, swiped it through the system, typed again, and then her expression did something. Zora couldn't quite read, a small compression around the mouth, a professional neutralization of whatever she was actually thinking. "1 moment, please." She picked up a phone, spoke quietly, hung up, typed again. Then she said, "I'm going to need you to speak with our authorization coordinator." "I need to speak with a nurse," Zora said. "I'm having contractions." "I understand. The coordinator will be right out." The coordinator was a man named Davis, late 30s, blue lanyard, the kind of face that suggested he had once wanted to go into a different field. He came from a side door, carrying a printed page and a clipboard. He set both on the counter and turned the page toward Zora so she could read it. She read it. She read it again. "Insurance status. Suspended effective November 14. "That's wrong," she said. "I understand this can be surprising." "That's wrong." She pulled out her phone, opened the insurance app she'd had for 6 years, and held it up. The screen confirmed what he was saying. Suspended. 48 hours ago. No explanation listed. No notification sent. "I didn't receive any notice. I didn't miss any payments. I have automatic billing. Sometimes these suspensions are triggered by a fraud review. I'm not committing fraud. I'm having a baby. She was breathing harder now, not just from the contraction building at the base of her spine, but from something hotter rising in her chest. Can you just call Dr. Voss? She's on staff here. Call her and she'll... Dr. Voss is in surgery until approximately 10 p.m., Davis said. I'm sorry. Without valid insurance authorization, we require a $15,000 deposit before admission. Cash or certified check. There it was. The number landed like something physical. Zora didn't have $15,000 in cash. Nobody carries $15,000 in cash. And her bank she already knew because she'd tried pull cash from the ATM on the way here and the machine had rejected her card twice. Her account had been flagged for a suspicious transaction review. Frozen. Just like her insurance. Just like every escape route she would have normally taken. She stood at that counter for a long moment, her wet coat growing cold against her shoulders, her daughter turning inside her body in ways that scared her, and she calculated. She was 34 years old. She had survived a childhood in foster care, a college career she'd funded through 3 simultaneous jobs, and a scholarship she'd written 17 drafts to win, and a decade building a career in investment strategy where nobody had ever once handed her anything. She had never in her adult life asked for help without having a plan B already waiting. She had no plan B. She said with extreme precision, "My daughter is in a breech position. Dr. Voss told me 2 weeks ago that if I came in while in labor, I would require immediate assessment and likely a C-section. Every minute you delay me increases her risk." Davis's face did not change. "I understand. We can contact County General and let them know you're coming." County General. 40 minutes away, in a storm. Zora picked up her insurance card from the counter. She put it back in her bag. She picked up her bag. She turned around and walked toward the exit. She walked because she refused to let that man watch her fall apart. The doors opened. The cold hit her like a wall. She made it 4 steps onto the wet sidewalk before the contraction arrived, not the building. Warning kind she'd been managing for the past hour, but a full, violent seizing of every muscle below her ribs. Her knees didn't give slowly. One moment she was standing, and the next the pavement was rising toward her face. She didn't hit it. Something caught her. 2 hands large, Steadyson grabbed her by the shoulders and took her weight before she understood what was happening. She was pulled upright, and then she heard a voice she had spent 3 years learning to forget. "I've got you." She looked up. The rain was in her eyes. She blinked it away. Ronan Cade stood on the sidewalk of Crescent Harbor Medical Center, in a dark coat, his hair wet, his face exactly as she remembered it, strong jaw, Korean-American features that had always made him look somehow younger than 40, up until the moment you caught his eyes, which had never looked young at all. He was looking at her, the way she imagined. A man looks at something he's been afraid of for a long time. She would have said his name, but another contraction rolled through, and all she managed was a sound she would have preferred he not hear. "We need to get her inside," he said, not to her, but into a phone he was already holding. He shifted her weight slightly, keeping one arm around her. "Now, maternity suite. I don't care what else is scheduled." A pause. "Yes, tonight." "Don't," Zora said, because she had to say something, and that was the only word available. "Don't what?" "Don't make calls on my behalf like you have any right to." He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Something passed through his expression, not guilt, not exactly, but something adjacent to it that he controlled before she could name it. "We can argue about rights after your daughter is safe," he said. "Ronan, the administrator, the man who turned you away, he wasn't asking. He already knew," he said it quietly, and there was something in his voice that made the back of her neck cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. "I own this hospital." She stared at him. "I acquired it 14 months ago, along with the 6 others in the Crescent network." He was already moving her toward the entrance, his arm steady against her back. "Davis is going to need a new career path after tonight. But that's a separate conversation." The doors opened. He walked her back inside. Davis was still at the counter. He looked up and began to say something professional, and measured, and Ronan looked at him with an expression so controlled, it was actually more frightening than anger, and said 4 words, books, admit her, right now. Sir, without insurance I own this building. His voice was quieter the second time. That was somehow worse. Every piece of equipment in it. Every contract on every physician on staff. Admit her, or tomorrow morning you'll be processing paperwork without a desk. Davis admitted her. Within 7 minutes, Zora was in a maternity suite with a fetal monitor tracking Maya's heartbeat, an IV in her arm, and 2 nurses who moved with the specific urgency of people who had received a strongly worded call from administration. Ronan stood on the other side of the room. She watched him from the bed while the nurses settled her, her wet hair against the pillow, her hands gripping the rail during the next contraction. When it passed, she let out a breath that shook slightly and then looked directly at him. "Why are you here?" she said. "Tonight, of all the nights for 3 years." He didn't look away. "I've been watching the situation with your insurance." "Watching. I found out what was happening 2 days ago. I was already on my way to Seattle when you found out what was happening." She repeated it the way she'd learned to repeat things back to clients who were saying something wrong and didn't realize it yet. "Someone suspended my insurance and froze my bank account, and you found out." "What does that mean, Ronan? What aren't you saying?" He was quiet for a moment. The fetal monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside the window, the rain had not stopped. "There are things," he said, "that I need to tell you." "I know there are things you need to tell me. There were things you needed to tell me 3 years ago when you disappeared." "Zora left," she said. And she'd said it before, in her head, 100 times, practiced the calm, controlled version. What came out was none of those versions. It was just the truth, flat and tired. "You left and you didn't say anything. And I spent 8 weeks thinking I'd imagine what we were. And then I figured out I was pregnant. And I spent 8 more weeks waiting for you to come back before I accepted that you weren't going to. I raised my daughter alone for the entire pregnancy because you left." The monitor beeped. "I know," he said. "That's not an explanation." "No," he agreed, "it's not." She was going to say something else. She had a great deal more to say, but her body interrupted the conversation, and she gripped the rail and focused on breathing until the nurse appeared with a kind face and very practical instructions. Ronan didn't leave the room. She hadn't told him to stay, but she also hadn't told him to go. In some part of her, the part she'd spent 3 years trying to smother, was not sorry he was there. When the contraction passed, she was exhausted in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep. The nurse checked the monitor, made a note, and quietly left. The fume settled into the sound of rain and the beeping machine, and Ronan's breathing on the other side of it. "Sit down," Zora said finally, "because I'm not going anywhere, and you clearly have something to say, and I am tired of watching you stand there like you're trying to find the right door." He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat. He didn't immediately speak. Ronan K. had always been a man who considered things before saying them, which he had once found reassuring and now found maddening. "Your insurance wasn't suspended by the company," he said. "I know that. I understood that the moment Davis said fraud review. No fraud review happens in 48 hours without someone triggering it." He looked at her. "You already worked it out. I'm an investment strategist, Ronan. I read the shape of financial interference for a living." She paused. "What I haven't worked out is who and why. And why now?" She let that land. "And why you already knew." He looked down at his hands for a moment. She'd seen him do that once before once. In 2 years of knowing him, when she'd asked him a question, he didn't know how to answer honestly, without losing something. "Your father," he said, "is Jun Seo Khan." The fetal monitor beeped. She waited to feel something recognition, maybe, or the particular sensation of a missing piece dropping into place. What she felt instead was something closer to stillness, the kind that arrives before a very large storm. "My father's name," she said carefully, "was a question mark on every form I filled out from the age of 7. I know. My mother never told me. I know. She died when I was 9. So I couldn't ask her." Her voice was steady. She was working to keep it that way. "Jun Seo Khan, the one who died 18 months ago. Han Meridian Holdings. Yes, he was a billionaire. Many times over." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. The tile was the standard drop sailing white of hospitals everywhere. Impersonal, practical, nothing to look at, which was exactly why she was looking at it. "He's dead," she said. "He died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. So he spent his entire life knowing I existed. He found out you existed when you were 11. Ronan's voice was careful. Not gentle exactly. Ronan had never been a gentleman, but considered. His family had suppressed contact with your mother. He didn't know she was pregnant when she left Seoul. When he found out, you were already in foster care. The ceiling, the tile, the beeping. He didn't come for me, she said. No. He watched. Yes. She closed her eyes. There are things you expect to hurt and things that catch you completely off guard, and somehow, even though she had lived her entire life, never knowing her father's name, even though she had made her peace with that absence in the way you make peace with a missing limb, by learning to function anyway, hearing that he had known, that he had watched her lose her mother and enter the system and fight her way out of it, and never once knocked on a door, or written a letter, or even sent a word through someone else. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum, like she could hold the feeling in. He left me something, she said. It wasn't a question. 42% of Han Meridian Holdings. She opened her eyes. The number sat in the room the way large numbers do, taking up space, demanding it. Say that again, she said quietly. 42% of one of the largest private holding companies in Asia Pacific. Hospitals, shipping, logistics, real estate. He paused. And something else, underneath all of that. Something he built before the legitimate empire and never fully separated from it. What kind of something? Ronan looked at her steadily. The kind that doesn't appear in annual reports. She stared at him. She was good at reading what people weren't saying better than most, and what Ronan wasn't saying was expanding to fill the room. And the other 58%, she said. His son, Victor Han, your half-brother. She said nothing. Victor has known about the inheritance for over a year, Ronan continued. He found out when the estate was being processed. He has spent Zora. Listen to me. This is important. He has spent the past 14 months dismantling your financial life piece by piece. The credit problems 2 years ago. The contract that fell through with Morrison Capital. The professional reference that disappeared before your promotion review. He leaned forwards slightly. Tonight wasn't the first attack. It was the most direct one. He suspended your insurance, knowing you were 38 weeks pregnant and high risk. The monitor beeped. She turned her head and looked at him. He knew I was pregnant, she said. Yes. He suspended it anyway. Yes. She was quiet for a very long time after that. Long enough that Ronan's face, which had been carefully controlled through all of it, developed a small crack around the edges that he couldn't quite keep closed. And you, she said finally. He didn't look away. Your name is on my father's estate documents, isn't it? I'm the designated trustee of your inheritance. Jun Seok sent you to find me. 3 years ago. Yes, she understood then, completely. The shape of it assembled itself in her mind, the way a financial picture assembles, when all the data is finally on the table, suddenly visible, undeniable, impossible to look away from. He had found her. He had stayed. He had fallen in love with her. She had always believed that. Even through the anger of the past 3 years, she had believed it, because she was good at recognizing truth, and she'd seen it in him, and then he had left. Not because he stopped loving her, but because staying would have meant telling her this. And he had decided, on her behalf, that she wasn't ready to know. She looked at him across the hospital room, the fetal monitor recording her daughter's heartbeat between them, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel in this moment. Not the rage she'd prepared for, not the grief she'd carried. Clarity. She knew exactly who Ronan Cade was now. All of it the man who had caught her before she hit the pavement, and the man who had decided for 3 years that her right to her own history was less important than his idea of protecting her. And she knew exactly what she intended to do about Victor Han. But those were both tomorrow's problems. Tonight, she had a daughter to deliver. Tell me the rest, she said. All of it. And Ronan. She looked at him directly. I mean every word I'm about to say. If you leave one single thing out, one name, one number, one decision you made, without telling me, I will find out eventually. I always find out. And that will be the less conversation we ever have. He held her gaze. I know, he said. And he began. He had been talking for 40 minutes when the contraction hit her, so hard she couldn't hear him anymore. Not because she lost consciousness, because her body simply routed every available resource away from the part of her brain that processes language and redirected it toward survival. The sound of Ronan's voice became something abstract present, but unreachable, while the pain moved through her in a long, grinding wave that started somewhere in her lower back and wrapped itself around her entire midsection, something trying to wring her out. When it passed, she was gripping the bed rail with both hands, and the nurse, a compact woman named Tess, who had the specific unflappable energy of someone who had delivered several hundred babies and was not impressed by drama, was already at the monitor, checking numbers, making the small sounds of professional assessment. We're getting closer, Tess said. How much closer? Zora said. Her voice came out rough. Depends on her. Tess tilted her head at the monitor screen. Baby's got ideas of her own. Ronan had stopped talking the moment the contraction began. He was still in the chair, but he'd moved forward to the edge of it, like he'd had to physically resist standing up, and his hands were clasped in front of him with a tightness that said more than anything he'd spoken in the past 40 minutes. When Tess stepped out, the room returned to rain and machines. Keep going, Zora said. You don't need to. Ronan. She turned her head and looked at him. I've been managing pain my entire life. Keep going. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully categorize, something between grief and respect that he didn't bother to hide this time. Then he continued. He told her about Jun Seok Han in the last 2 years of his life. The way the cancer had moved fast, and then stalled, and then moved again, giving the old man just enough time to believe he might survive before making clear that he wouldn't. He told her about the estate planning, the legitimate documentation, the legitimate attorneys, the very deliberate and legally careful process by which Jun Seok had structured his will to ensure that what he left Zora couldn't simply be challenged and dismissed. He wasn't sentimental about it, Ronan said. He was strategic. He knew Victor would fight it. He built the estate documents to withstand Victor. Did it work? A pause. Mostly. Define mostly. Victor's attorneys are currently challenging the will on the grounds of cognitive decline. He said it flatly. No cushioning. She'd told him not to leave anything out, and he wasn't. They have medical records. I believe were either selectively gathered or altered, suggesting Jun Seok wasn't mentally competent when the documents were signed. Zora absorbed this. Are they convincing? To someone who doesn't know what the real records show? Yes. And the real records? I have them, he said it simply. I had Jun Seok's personal physician preserve complete documentation from the period the will was signed. His oncologist, his neurologist, his GP, 3 independent assessments, all confirming full cognitive competency. He paused. Victor doesn't know I have them. She watched him. Why didn't you just give them to the estate attorneys when the challenge was filed? The question sat in the air between them for a beat too long. Because, he said, giving those records to the estate attorneys would have required revealing my role as trustee, which would have surfaced my connection to you, which would have made it impossible to keep pretending. You didn't know where I was, she finished. He didn't look away. He didn't apologize. Both of those things made her angrier than anything else he could have done, because she'd always known somewhere underneath the practiced hatred of the past 3 years that Ronan Kade was not a man who lied about being a coward. When he did something that cost someone else, he stood in front of that fact without flinching. She found she couldn't decide if that made it better or worse. You let Victor run his challenge unopposed, she said, because stopping it would have exposed you. Temporarily, I was building a different approach. What approach? Getting you the full information and letting you decide what to do with it. Which you're doing now. Which I'm doing now. Yes. 3 years late. Yes, she looked at the ceiling again. The tile was still the same tile. He threatened you, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd had enough time during the last contraction to fill in the shape of what he hadn't said yet. Victor. When Jun Seok died and the estate was processed and Victor found out you were the trustee, he threatened you. Ronan's jaw moved slightly. He threatened to report the syndicate's operations to federal investigators. He had enough information to significantly damage the organization. Not destroy it, but enough. And you disappeared instead of telling me. I removed myself from your life to remove you from his target radius. If he didn't know what you meant to me, he already knew about the inheritance, Ronan. He didn't know about us. If he had, you would have been the first place he looked. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, voice dropping half a register. Everything Victor has done to you. In the past 3 years, the contracts, the references, the credit interference he did, that believing you were a stranger he needed to financially weaken before you ever learned you existed. If he had known you were personally connected to me, he would have moved faster and harder. Zora was quiet for a long moment. So you're saying, she said carefully, that disappearing without explanation was protecting me. I'm saying it was the decision I made with the information and the timeline I had. That's not what I asked. He was quiet. I'm going to ask you one more time, she said. Was disappearing without telling me the truth protecting me? Or was it protecting yourself from having to watch me react to a truth you didn't want to deliver? The monitor beeped 6 times before he answered. Both, he said. She had expected the first answer. The second one surprised her more than it should have. Before she could respond, the door opened and Tess came back with a second nurse and a look on her face that shifted the atmosphere in the room entirely. The baby has turned, Tess said, moving to the monitor quickly. Zora, I need you to listen to me. The position has changed and not in the direction we want. Dr. Voss is still in surgery. We're going to contact the on-call OB right now, but I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that we're moving faster than expected. Zora felt the cold move through her, then not the cold of the rain outside, or the air conditioning, or the hospital sheets, but the specific cold of something that lives in the body and knows when the stakes have changed. She looked at the ceiling and she thought, Maya. She thought, not yet. Do what you need to do, she said, and her voice was steady, and she was proud of exactly that, and nothing else. Ronan stood up from the chair. He moved toward the wall to make room for the nurses, and she saw his hands, both of them, open at his sides, and she understood he was doing the only thing available to him in that moment, which was stand in the room and not be in the way, and hope that was enough. It wasn't enough, but it was what existed. The next hour and a half was not something Zora would ever describe in detail to anyone, not because it was too painful, but because the language for it didn't exist outside the body. The on-call OB, Dr. Merritt, arrived with the specific calm authority of a man who had been woken up for situations like this enough times that the alarm no longer produced adrenaline, only focus. He assessed. He consulted. He made a decision. C-section. 20 minutes. When they wheeled her toward the OR, Ronan was standing in the corridor and she saw him through the gap in the door as it closed, standing very still, watching her go, and wearing the expression of a man who understood for the first time what it cost to be outside a room where something he cared about, what Cap'n Wong, was happening, and have no power over the outcome. Good, she thought. Now you know. Surgery took 41 minutes. She was awake for all of it, separated from her own abdomen by a blue curtain and the careful professionalism of 3 people who were very good at their jobs. She stared at the light above her, and she did not pray, and she did not bargain with anything, because she had never believed in deals with the universe. She simply waited, and breathed, and was still, and kept her blood pressure under some degree of control. Then Dr. Merritt said, "Here she is," and there was a sound, or rather, there was the absence of a sound for 40 seconds, that felt like 40 minutes, and then the sound arrived, thin and furious and absolutely certain of its own existence. Dump. Maya Ellington, 7 pounds 1 ounce. A voice that filled the room. When they placed her against Zora's chest, small and red and vigorously outraged at the world she'd been introduced to, Zora pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and said nothing at all. Some moments don't need words and can't survive them. She cried. She wasn't ashamed of that. She cried hard, and then she stopped because Maya was looking at her with the unfocused, searching expression of a person who has just arrived somewhere completely new and is trying to get a read on the situation. "It's okay," Zora told her. "I've got you. You're safe." She meant it. She had never meant anything more. They moved her to recovery. They brought Maya, cleaned and wrapped and indignant, and placed her in the bassinet beside the bed. Zora lay in the soft exhaustion of aftermath, not sleep, not quite wakefulness, something between them, and listened to her daughter breathe. Rojan was in the doorway. She'd heard the door, but she kept her eyes on Maya for another moment before turning her head. He looked like someone had let the air out of him. Not dramatic collapse. Ronan didn't do dramatic collapse, but a particular kind of stillness that suggested the past 3 hours had cost him something significant, and he hadn't yet decided whether the debt was worth what it bought. "She's okay," Zora said. "I can see that." His voice was rough at the edges. "Just slightly. You're both okay. We're both okay." He came into the room and stood by the basin set and looked at Maya with an expression she didn't have a name for. She watched him do it without saying anything. He had known about the pregnancy, she'd understood that from what he said earlier, but knowing about a pregnancy and standing next to a bassinet containing an actual human being, you have some. Complicated stake in were clearly two different experiences. After a moment he said quietly, "She looks like you." "Good," Zora said. "That's better for her." He almost smiled. Almost. She let him have that moment, small as it was. Then she said, "Sit down. We're not finished." He pulled the chair to the same spot as before and sat in it, like it was the only place left on Earth he was allowed to occupy. "The syndicate," she said. "Tell me what it is. Not the polished version. The real one," he told her. Took him 20 minutes. Shipping routes that moved things that weren't on the manifests. Financial instruments that cleaned money moving through 3 continents. A network of companies that existed officially, paid taxes, employed people, and served simultaneously as a very sophisticated shell. June Seok had built it in the 1980s, before Han Meridian had grown legitimate enough to sustain itself, and then he'd kept it, because by the time he wanted to stop, stopping safely was complicated. "How deep are you in it?" she said. "I run it," Ronan said. "No decoration. Have for 6 years. June Seok handed it to me when his cancer made the day-to-day impossible. I accepted because I'd been working inside it for a decade already, and because he stopped. Because I thought I could control what it was used for. Cap the damage." He paused. "That is exactly as naive as it sounds." "I know," she watched him. "Is that why my father built the clause into the will?" He looked up sharply. She'd gotten there before he told her. She watched him register that and reassemble. "He told you," she said. "Not about the clause. Not directly. But I read the documents, Ronan. I was an investment strategist who spent 2 years building due diligence assessments for high-risk acquisitions. When you told me I inherited 42% of a multi-billion-dollar private holding company and you're the trustee, the first question isn't what do I get? It's what are the conditions?" She paused. "There are conditions," he exhaled. A small, controlled sound. "If you formally claim your inheritance, I'm legally obligated to begin dismantling the criminal operations within 12 months. There it was. She sat with it. "He designed my inheritance as a detonator," she said. "Yes. He wanted someone he trusted to run the legitimate empire. He wanted someone he loved, I suppose, though I'm not going to spend tonight trying to call what he felt love someone connected to him to carry the legal trigger. And he put you as the trustee because you were the one person who would protect the documents against Victor, and because he knew that if I claimed the inheritance, you would lose the power structure you'd built your entire professional life around." She paused. "He wasn't being cruel to you. He was betting that you'd become the kind of man who would let it go." Ronan said nothing for a long moment. "Was he right?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in 12 months. That was, she thought, the most honest thing he'd said all night. Before she could respond, her phone retrieved from her bag by Tess and left on the bedside table lit up with a number she didn't recognize. A Seattle area code. She stared at it. Ronan leaned forward and looked at the screen, and something changed in his face. "Don't answer that," he said. She answered it. "Miss Ellington." A man's voice, smooth and educated, and carrying the specific warmth of someone performing warmth rather than feeling it. I'm sorry to disturb you at such a late hour. I understand tonight has been eventful. My name is Victor Hahn. I believe we have a great deal to discuss. The room went absolutely still. Even Maya, impossibly, seemed to hold her breath. Zora looked at Ronan. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, not quite fear, because she was fairly certain Ronan K didn't do straightforward fear, but something close to it. Warning. Something urgent that his professional calm couldn't quite contain. Victor, she said. Her voice came out level. Whatever she was feeling, and she was a considerable amount, it wasn't available to him. You suspended my health insurance while I was in my 38th week of a high-risk pregnancy. A pause. Delicate, calculated. There was an administrative. Don't, she said. Don't do that. You're calling me from a private number on the night your strategy almost killed my daughter. The least you owe me is honesty. Another pause. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone. What replaced it was something cooler and more accurate. You're more direct than I expected. Most people are, when they're angry enough. You're angry. Understandably. He said it the way you say. The weather is unfortunate, acknowledging a fact, assigning it no particular weight. I'd like to meet with you. I'm in a hospital recovery room. Tomorrow, then. Or whenever you're ready. A beat. There's a significant amount of money at stake, Ms. Ellington, and a family history that I think, if you understood fully, you'd want to navigate carefully. She understood exactly what he was doing. He was measuring her. Not her intelligence he'd already recalibrated. That, she could hear it. He was measuring what she knew and how she felt about it, and whether the right combination of money and family language might slow her down long enough for him to find another angle. I'll be in touch, she said. She ended the call. Ronan was already on his feet. How did he know you were in the hospital, he said. It wasn't a question. Someone inside this building told him. Or someone in his network has been tracking me closely enough to know when my location changed. She set the phone down. How much does Victor know about you and me? 3 years ago, he didn't know we had any personal connection. And now? Ronan's jaw tightened slightly. I don't know. If he knows you're here tonight, then he knows I've told you something. Or he suspects it. He turned toward the window. The rain had finally slowed to a thin, persistent drizzle. He'll accelerate. He can't challenge the will effectively if you're informed, represented, and in possession of Jun Seok's medical records. His only advantage was that you didn't know what you were fighting. Then we need to move before he does. Zora. He turned back. You gave birth 4 hours ago, I'm aware. You need... Don't, she said quietly. Don't tell me what I need. Don't make decisions about my timeline. You've done that for 3 years, and it's brought us here. She looked at him steadily. I need information and I need to think. Both of those things I'm capable of doing from a hospital bed. She paused. Get me everything you have on Victor. Every piece of documentation. The real medical records. Whatever Sarah has been collecting. How do you know about Sarah? You mentioned Jun Seok had a legitimate family. Victor is the older son. There was a daughter, Sarah Hahn, mentioned in the Han Meridian Board records from last year. I read those records 18 months ago as part of a different research project, and I didn't know why the name stayed with me. She paused. Now I know why. She's my half-sister. Ronan looked at her for a moment. She's been building a file on Victor. I know, because you just confirmed it instead of denying it. She kept her voice patient. Get me in contact with her. It's 3 a.m. Then send a message, and she can respond at a reasonable hour. She held his gaze. And Ronan, the person who called Victor tonight, someone in this hospital who knew I was here and called him within what, 2 hours of my admission? I'll find out who. Quietly. Don't do anything that leaves a mark. He looked at her for a beat. You're very calm. I'm not calm, she said. I'm exhausted, and I had surgery 4 hours ago, and my daughter is asleep 6 inches from me, and I have a half-brother who tried to kill us both through bureaucratic indifference. Her voice didn't shake. I'm the opposite of calm. But I've been poor and black and female in rooms full of people who expected me to be overwhelmed my entire career, and I learned very early that the moment you look like what you feel, You've handed someone a weapon. She paused. So I look calm. I'm not. He nodded once. Something in his face shifted, not softened, exactly, but opened slightly, like a window that had been painted shut for a long time. I'll reach out to Sarah, he said. I'll get the documents to a secure location. And I'll find out who made the call. Good. He moved toward the door. Stopped. For what it's worth, he said without turning around. Watching you tonight. I want you to know I understand now, what I should have understood 3 years ago. A pause. You never needed protection. You needed information. And I took that from you. The room was quiet, yes, she said. You did. He left. Zora lay in the silence and the dim light, and she looked at Maya sleeping in the bassinet, this small breathing, furious into the world person who had arrived on the worst and most revelatory night of her mother's life. And she understood that by tomorrow morning, Victor Hahn would know that she knew. And knowing would make him dangerous in a different way. She thought about the phone call, the smoothness of it, the way it recalibrated mid-sentence when she didn't respond the way he expected. Smart, controlled, and frightened underneath both of those things in a way he thought he'd hidden. He was frightened because he'd done what powerful people do. When they're cornered, he'd reached for contact, hoping that a conversation could tell him how much damage control was needed. But reaching for contact meant he'd made his first mistake. She could not afford to waste it. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Sarah. Ronan messaged me. I've been waiting for this for 8 months. I have everything. When can we talk? Zora looked at the message for a long moment. Then she looked at Maya. Her daughter's hands were curled into small fists, the way newborns' hands always are, like they arrived ready to hold something, still waiting to find out what. Zora typed back, tomorrow morning. Early. Don't contact Victor. 3 dots appeared immediately. I haven't spoken to Victor voluntarily in 4 months, Sarah wrote. He doesn't know I know what he did. That ends tomorrow. Zora set the phone down. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. Seattle was quiet in the way it gets in the middle of the night, not peaceful, exactly, but temporarily paused, like the city was taking a breath before whatever came next. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She planned. And in the morning, when Victor Hahn sent a car to Crescent Harbor Medical Center with a bouquet of white flowers and a handwritten note expressing his profound relief at her and her daughter's safe delivery, the note carefully omitting any acknowledgement of what had nearly happened, she read it twice, set it aside, and said to Tess, who happened to be starting her shift, please have those removed. I'm allergic. She wasn't allergic. But some messages need to be sent without words, and that was the first one. Victor Hahn had spent 14 months believing Zora Ellington was a problem he could solve by keeping her small. He had believed this because he had never once, in all his careful surveillance of her life, stopped a simple question. What does a woman who built everything she has from nothing, without a single person's help, actually do when someone finally hands her a reason to fight back? He was about to find out, and there would be no going back from the answer. The flowers were still in the hallway trash can when Sarah Hahn walked through the door at 7:43 in the morning. She was smaller than Zora had imagined. 5'3" maybe, with June Seok's jaw softened into something less severe, and eyes that moved around the room the way eyes move when someone has spent a long time being careful about what they look at in front of whom. She was 31 years old, and she carried a leather messenger bag that was visibly heavy, and she stopped just inside the doorway and looked at Zora in the hospital bed, and then at Maya in the bassinet, and something in her face did something. Complicated and private that she recovered from quickly. You look like him, Sarah said, around the eyes. I wasn't expecting that. Sit down, Zora said. We don't have much time. Sarah sat. She pulled the messenger bag onto her lap and unzipped it and removed a manila envelope that was thick enough to suggest it had been assembled over a long period by someone who had been very, very careful. She sat on the bed beside Zora's hand, but didn't open it yet. How long have you been collecting this? Zora said. 8 months of organized collection. The first pieces I stumbled into about a year before that. Sarah's voice was steady, controlled, the voice of someone who had rehearsed being calm about things that were not calm. I found an internal email chain by accident. I was using Victor's assistant's computer to print a document. She'd stepped out. My laptop had died, and the screen was open. The subject line was your name. Zora waited. Your full name, Sarah said, with a case number attached, like you were a project. The room was quiet except for Maya breathing. I should have gone to someone immediately, Sarah continued. I didn't. I went home and I sat with it for 3 days, and I tried to convince myself I'd misread it or that there was an innocent explanation, because Victor is my brother, and I had spent 30 years choosing not to see what he was. She said it without self-pity, which made it land harder. Then I went back, and I started looking, and I didn't stop. Zora picked up the envelope and opened it. The contents were organized with the precision of someone who understood that evidence without structure is just paper. Employment reference requests with Victor's authorization stamps and the corresponding letters of refusal sent to Zora's prospective employers. Internal financial communications discussing a specific credit interference strategy. Emails printed, dated, with full headers intact, discussing the Morrison Capital contract that had collapsed 18 months ago. The language in the emails was careful, professional. Written by people who knew they were creating records and had tried to leave room for deniability. They had not left enough room. The last document in the envelope was a single page. An internal authorization memo dated 11 days ago. Zora read it once and then read it again. Insurance suspension. Her policy number, her name, her OB's name, and the notation of high-risk pregnancy status, 37 weeks. Victor Hahn's digital signature at the bottom. He had known exactly what he was doing. He knew about the baby, Zora said, yes. He knew I was high risk. The memo references Dr. Voss's records. Someone pulled them. Sarah's voice didn't waver, but her hands, Zora noticed, were pressed flat against her own thighs. Pressing down, the way you press down on something that wants to shake. I don't know who pulled them. I don't have that piece yet. It doesn't matter. The memo is enough. Zora set the page down. Have you shown this to anyone? No one. Only Ronan knew I had it, and I only told him 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Zora filed that away and didn't react to it yet. Ronan knocked on the open door and came in without waiting, which she noted and chose not to address in front of Sarah. He looked like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from somewhere. That wasn't the hospital cafeteria he'd sent some. She understood. Because Ronan Kade solved problems through logistics when he couldn't solve them through presence, and he set one on Zora's bedside table without asking if she wanted it. She wanted it. She didn't say so. The person who called Victor last night, he said, standing near the window. Night shift admissions clerk. He's been on Victor's payroll for 7 months. Victor placed him here when he found out this hospital was connected to Crescent Network. A pause. He's been reporting on patient admissions, specifically flagged to notify Victor if your name appeared in the system. Sarah looked at Ronan sharply. He had someone here for 7 months? He's been planning for the possibility that Zora would end up at this hospital specifically because her OBA practices here. Ronan's voice was even. The evenness of it was doing a lot of work. He anticipated her movements. He planned around them. Zora looked at the authorization memo again. This isn't improvised, she said. None of this is. The insurance, the bank freeze, the plant in admissions, this was built. Over time. With specific knowledge of my medical situation, she set the memo down. Someone has been feeding him information about my pregnancy, my OB's assessments, my timeline. The room got very still. My records are private, she said. Nobody argued with that. Which means, she continued, someone with access to my medical records has been providing them to Victor Hahn. She looked at Ronan. Who has access to those records besides Dr. Voss's practice? The hospital network, he said. Any physician in the Crescent system who's treated you. I've only ever seen Dr. Voss, and anyone with administrative access to the record system. He paused. Which, given that I own the network and didn't tighten the administrative access protocols when I acquired it. He stopped. Your administrative access, she said. My administration. Yes. The people I inherited when I bought the hospital group. His jaw was tight. I didn't audit them. I should have. You should have, she agreed. She said it without heat, which was somehow more pointed than heat would have been. She picked up her coffee and drank half of it in silence. Okay, she said. Here's where we are. Victor knows I know. He'll be moving to accelerate the competency challenge before I can respond. He has fabricated or selectively gathered medical records suggesting Jun-suk was cognitively impaired. You have the real records. She looked at Ronan. Where are they? Secured off site. A location Victor doesn't know about. You're certain he doesn't know about it? Certain. Are you as certain as you were that your administrative staff was clean? A beat. No, he said, I'm not. Good, she thought. He was learning. We need to move them, she said. Today, to a location neither of you has used before. Give me options by this afternoon. She turned to Sarah. The emails and the memo, are these originals or copies? Copies. The originals are on a drive in a safety deposit box. The box is in my name at a bank Victor has no relationship with. Good. Keep them there. These copies go to my attorney. She paused. I need an attorney. I have someone, Ronan said. I need someone who is mine, she said clearly. Not someone connected to you or to the Han Meridian estate. Someone with no prior involvement. He nodded. He understood the distinction. She finished the coffee, set the cup down, looked at Sarah. Tell me about him, she said. Not the documentation. Him. What does he want? Not the money, he already has the money. What does he actually want? Sarah was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands. Control, she said finally. He's always wanted control, even when we were children. It was never about what things were worth, it was about whether he got to decide. She paused. Our father made him feel like he was never quite the right shape. Like no matter what Victor did, Jun-seok was looking past him for something else. She looked up. He was, of course. He was looking for you. The weight of that settled in the room. Victor knows that, Sarah continued. Not consciously, maybe. But he knows. Somewhere underneath all of it, he knows that our father changed his will to give nearly half his empire to a daughter he'd never met. And that says something about what Jun-seok actually thought Victor was worth. She paused. That's the wound. The money is just where the wound lives. Zora looked at the authorization memo one more time. A man had signed his name to a document that would deny emergency medical care to a woman in her 38th week of a high-risk pregnancy. Not in anger, not in panic, deliberately, with time to think about it. He's going to come to the hospital, she said, in person. He already called. The flowers were a test. He wanted to see how I'd respond, whether I'd keep them, what message I'd send back. What message did you send? Sarah asked. I had them thrown out. Sarah almost smiled. Almost. He won't like that. Good. Angry people make mistakes. I want him angry. She paused. But I want to be the one controlling when and how his anger arrives. She looked at Ronan. Can you get me out of here by tomorrow? Medically, doctor. Merritt will want you here for at least. I didn't ask about doctor. Merritt. I asked if you can get me out. Ronan looked at her for a moment. Yes. Then arrange it. I'm not sitting in this building where Victor has a contact in admissions and access to my medical records. I need to be somewhere he can't map. She paused. And I need to start looking like I'm less prepared than I am. That was the sentence that changed the texture of the room. Sarah looked at her carefully. What does that mean? It means Victor's greatest advantage has been information asymmetry. He knows more than his target. He plans around what he knows. She sat up slightly straighter against the pillows, which cost her something, the surgery still making itself known in ways she was choosing not to perform. The moment I let him know I have Sarah's documents, he'll pivot. He'll find another angle I haven't anticipated. So he can't know what I have yet. You want to appear weaker than you are, Ronan said. I want to appear exactly as weak as he expects me to be. She paused. He expects a woman who just found out her father was a stranger, who just had emergency surgery, who has a newborn, no working bank account, no insurance, no immediate family support. He expects someone who is overwhelmed. Let him have that expectation. Feed it. Ronan was quiet for a moment. That's a dangerous play. All the good plays are. The door opened. She expected Tess or Dr. Merritt making morning rounds. What she did not expect was the man who came through the door tall, impeccably dressed for 8 in the morning, carrying nothing except the specific kind of confidence that people develop when they have never once in their adult life been told no and meant it. Victor Hahn. He stopped just inside the doorway, the way a person stops when they're performing restraint, when they've calculated that hesitation reads as courtesy. His eyes moved from Zora to Sarah to Ronan, and the calculation behind them was so visible to Zora that she could almost hear it running. Sarah went rigid. Not visibly from the outside, you might miss it. But Zora was watching closely and she saw it. Ronan didn't move. Didn't speak. He simply stood by the window and looked at Victor with an expression so controlled it was essentially a wall. Victor looked at Zora and smiled. It was a very good smile. The kind that had probably worked on a lot of people. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I wanted to come personally, to express my relief." "You could have called," Zora said. "I did call." A pause. "Last night. You could have called again." He moved into the room, uninvited. He did it with such practiced ease that it almost read as something other than what it was. He glanced at the bassinet, a brief, calibrated glance, enough to show he'd acknowledged the existence, not enough to suggest genuine interest, and then turned the full attention of his back to Zora. "You're more composed than I expected," he said. "You said that last night, too." "It remains true." He looked at Sarah. "I didn't know you were coming here." "I didn't tell you," Sarah said. Her voice was flat. Something moved behind Victor's eyes, quick, gone. "Of course. You and Zora, it makes sense you'd want to connect." He said it the way you say something you want to sound reasonable while communicating the opposite. Though perhaps overwhelming Zora with family introductions the morning after major surgery. "She asked me to come," Sarah said. Another brief silence. Victor looked at Ronan. "Ronan, I didn't realize you were still in Seattle." "I'm still in Seattle," Ronan said. The minimalism of it clearly registered. Victor's smile held. "I'd like a few minutes alone with Miss Ellington," he said to the room, "if she's willing." "She can speak for herself," Ronan said. Zora looked at Victor steadily. She was doing the things she'd learned in 20 conference room years of being underestimated, keeping her face at comfortable neutrality. The expression that says, "I'm listening," without saying anything about what she planned to do with what she heard. "It's fine," she said. "Give us a few minutes." Sarah looked at her sharply. Zora gave her the smallest possible movement of her chin. A signal. Sarah held it for 1 second, then collected her bag and stood. Ronan didn't move immediately. She looked at him with an expression she hoped communicated. "I know what I'm doing." "Trust me for 5 minutes," he left. He didn't look happy about it. Victor watched the door close. Then he turned back to Zora, and something shifted in the quality of his attention, subtle. But she felt it, the way you feel a barometric change before a storm. The performance of warmth recalibrated into something cooler and more direct. "You're not surprised to see me," he said. "Should I be?" "Most people in your position would be." He moved closer. Not threatening, she cataloged it carefully, but reducing the performance distance. The closer you stand to someone, the harder it is for them to manage their reaction. He knew that. You had a significant shock last night. Multiple shocks. Most people need processing time. I process quickly. Apparently, he studied her. "What has Ronan told you?" "What has Ronan told me?" she repeated. Not a question. The exact intonations of someone buying half a second. "He's not a disinterested party," Victor said. "Whatever version of our father's estate he's presented to you has been shaped by his position in it. His interests are not the same as yours." "That's probably true," she said. He blinked. He'd expected deflection or defense. Agreement threw him for just a fraction of a second, and she watched him recover. "The will," he said, "is being contested on legitimate grounds. My father's final year was not—" "I know about the competency challenge," she said. "And I know about the medical records you're using to support it." A pause. "You've had access to estate documents. I've had access to enough." She kept her voice entirely even. "Victor, I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to actually answer it." He waited. "The insurance suspension," she said. "You authorized it." I know that. I'm not asking whether you did it. I'm asking why now. Why, with everything you've spent the past year building, did you choose this week? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Your OB filed a birth plan update with the hospital 10 days ago, flagging potential C-section requirement. Emergency admission probability high. A pause. I was advised that once the baby was born, your emotional and legal position would stabilize, that you'd have more resources to mount a challenge. She listened to him say this. She listened to him explain in clean professional language that he had chosen to cut off her medical coverage because a baby's arrival would have made her stronger. So you moved first, she said. I protected my position. She looked at him for a long moment. Maya made a small sound in the bassinet. Victor didn't look at it. Here's what I want you to understand, Zora said, and her voice dropped into a register she reserved for moments when she needed to be absolutely certain she was heard. I'm not going to spend this conversation threatening you. I'm not going to perform outrage so you can measure how emotional I am. I'm going to tell you one true thing, and I want you to actually hear it. She paused. You have been fighting a version of me that doesn't exist. A woman who is overwhelmed. A woman who can be financially destabilized into submission. A woman who will look at 42% of $1 billion empire and decide the fight isn't worth it. She paused again. I am not that woman. I have never been that woman. And whatever your next move is, I need you to rebuild it around who I actually am. Victor looked at her. Because if you don't, she said, you're going to keep making mistakes. And I'm going to keep catching them. He was quiet for 5 full seconds. She counted. I see, he said finally. Then he smiled. And this smile was different from the first one, smaller, less performed, and considerably more dangerous. Then we understand each other, he said. He left. She exhaled slowly and looked at the ceiling. Her hands beneath the blanket were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against the mattress and breathed until they stopped. Ronan came back in 40 seconds after Victor walked out, which told her he'd been standing just outside the door. What did he say? Ronan said. He confirmed the insurance authorization. Not in those words, but he confirmed it. She looked up. And he's not scared enough. He should be, and he isn't, she paused. Which means there's something I don't have yet. Something he's holding that he thinks cancels out everything I just told him. Ronan was very still. So what is it? She said. What am I missing? There's something I haven't told you yet. The specific quality of those words, the weight in them, the way he said them looking at a point slightly to the left of her face, told her this was not a small omission. Tell me now, she said. The syndicate. He moved to the window, stood with his back to her, briefly then turned. Victor's attorneys aren't just arguing Jun-Suk's competency. They have a second angle. They're planning to argue that the will itself is a criminal instrument. Meaning they're going to claim that Jun-Seok transferred assets to you specifically so that the syndicate could retain control of Han Meridian through you. He paused. With me as trustee, they'll argue that the inheritance was never about giving you a legacy. It was about placing criminal operational control inside a legitimate heir, hidden from investigators. The room went cold. She understood it immediately. The structure of it, the terrible legal elegance. They're going to say, she said slowly, that I'm a front. Yes, that my father used me. That's the argument. And with you as trustee, it's credible enough to freeze the inheritance pending a federal investigation. Potentially for years. He said it directly, the way you say something that will hurt, regardless of how gently you try to deliver it. Victor doesn't need to win the competency challenge. He just needs to make the syndicate argument credible enough for a judge to pump the brakes. And if the inheritance is frozen, I get nothing, she said. He maintains full control, and I spend years in legal proceedings that drain every resource I have while he runs the empire. She paused. And if federal investigators start looking at the syndicate and find my name attached to the trust documents, your reputation, your career, your ability to work in finance. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She sat with it. The shaking had returned to her hands. She didn't try to stop it this time. She just sat with it and let herself feel the full shape of what Victor had built. Not just the insurance, not just the references and the credit interference. This, a legal architecture designed specifically to use her inheritance as a weapon against her, to make her father's attempt at justice look like organized crime. He hadn't been measuring her in this room 10 minutes ago. He'd been telling her the answer was already buried. The insider, she said. Her voice had gone flat, the flatness that comes on the other side of anger, when the anger runs out of fuel and what's left is something colder and more deliberate. Inside your organization. The one who gave Victor's attorneys enough information to make the syndicate argument credible. She looked at Ronan. Who is it? His jaw worked for a moment. I have 3 likely candidates. I haven't confirmed. Who do you think it is? She said. A long pause. Marcus Tay, he said, my operations director. He's been with the organization for 11 years. He knows everything. Another pause. And 6 weeks ago, I passed him over for a role he'd expected to receive. He knew it was connected to the changes I was planning, the restructuring, the beginning of the wind down. He looked at her directly. He knew what your inheritance would mean for the organization. I think he decided that helping Victor freeze it was better than watching me dismantle everything he'd spent 11 years building. Does he know you suspect him? No. She thought about Victor's face when he left. The small, confident smile. He already has Marcus, she said. Victor already has the testimony, or the affidavit, or whatever form it's going to take. That's why he isn't scared. He came here to measure me because he wanted to know how fast I'd figured it out. He wasn't worried. He just wanted a timeline. Ronan's expression confirmed it before he spoke. The filing is being prepared, he said. My attorney, my criminal attorney, not the estate side, was contacted this morning by a federal liaison. Someone filed a tip. Marcus. Almost certainly. She looked at Maya. Her daughter was asleep, entirely unaware that the inheritance that was supposed to be her mother's birthright had just been turned into a potential criminal indictment. Unaware that the man who was supposed to have protected her mother's interests had an 11-year loyalist prepared to testify against them. Unaware that in the next 48 hours, if they didn't move exactly right, everything Jun Seok-han had tried to leave his daughter would be swallowed by a federal freeze, and Victor Han would have won without ever setting foot in a courtroom. Zora looked away from Maya. She looked at Ronan. I need you to do something, she said. And I need you to do it without asking me if I'm certain, because I am certain, and I need to say this exactly once. He waited. Marcus, she said, don't touch him. Don't move against him. Don't threaten him. Don't do any of the things you would normally do when someone inside your organization betrays you. She held Ronan's gaze. I need him exactly where he is, believing exactly what he believes, for 72 more hours. Ronan understood her immediately. She could see it, the specific shift in his expression of a man who has operated in calculated deception long enough to recognize a trap being built. You want to use him, Ronan said. I want Victor to keep believing his inside information is good, she said. I want Marcus feeding Victor exactly what I decide. Marcus feeds him. She paused. Which means I need to get to Marcus before Victor does. How do you get to a man who's already chosen a side without him realizing you know he's chosen it? Zora looked at the authorization memo still sitting on her bed. Victor's signature at the bottom. A man who had signed his name to something that could have killed her daughter, confident he was untouchable. The same way I've done everything in my life, she said quietly. She picked up her phone. I walk in like I own the room. Outside the window, Seattle was bright and cold and entirely indifferent to what was decided inside one recovery room on the 4th floor of Crescent Harbor Medical Center. The city did not care. The city never cared. That was something Zora had learned at age 9, standing outside a courthouse after a family court hearing with a social worker she'd met that morning, and it was something she had never forgotten and never resented and had simply built her life around. Nobody was coming. You built it yourself, or it didn't get built. She started making calls, and 72 hours from that moment, either Victor Han would learn what that actually meant, or everything her father had tried to give her would disappear into a legal freeze from which it might never emerge. And Marcus Tay would have destroyed not just Ronan's organization, but Zora's future and her daughter's inheritance with 11 years of institutional knowledge, handed to the wrong man at exactly the wrong time. There was no version of the next 3 days that allowed for a single mistake. She was discharged from Crescent Harbor at 11:43 the following morning, 31 hours after Maya was born, against Dr. Merritt's explicit recommendation and with a signed acknowledgement that she understood the risks of early post-surgical discharge. She understood them. She signed anyway. Ronan had arranged a private residence, a 3-bedroom house in Magnolia, owned through a shell entity with no traceable connection to his name, his organization, or anything Victor's researchers could find in 72 hours of looking. A nurse named Carol came with the house, hired through an agency that had no relationship with the Crescent Network. Zora walked through the front door carrying Maya in the infant carrier they'd purchased that morning, looked at the living room, and said, "Set up the table in here. I need a workspace." Carol looked at the woman who had major abdominal surgery 32 hours ago and was now asking for a workspace, and made a professional decision not to comment. The table was set up within the hour. Zora sat down at it. She was in pain. Not the theatrical kind that announces itself and demands acknowledgement, but the constant, low-frequency kind that lives underneath everything else and makes every movement a negotiation. She had prescription painkillers in a white paper bag on the kitchen counter, and she had taken exactly one, which had made the edges of her thinking soft in a way she couldn't afford, so she'd stopped. She was managing on ibuprofen and coffee, and the specific motivational fuel of being extremely angry at a specific person. She spread Sarah's documents across the table. She added the notes she'd taken during Ronan's disclosures. She added a legal pad and wrote across the top in her own handwriting, "What Victor knows. What Victor thinks I know. What Victor doesn't know I know." 3 columns. She worked through them methodically for 2 hours, while Carol fed Maya and Ronan sat on the other side of the table making calls. He kept his voice low for. At 2 in the afternoon, Sarah arrived. She came through the door looking like she hadn't slept either, her messenger bag replaced by her expression carrying the particular tightness of someone operating past their own limits on willpower alone. She sat down across from Zora, looked at the table, and said nothing for a moment. "He called me this morning," Sarah said. Zora looked up. "Victor. He wanted to know if I'd spoken to you. I told him I'd stopped by the hospital briefly to introduce myself, and that you seemed overwhelmed and exhausted, and not particularly interested in engaging with the family." She paused. He seemed satisfied with that. Good. Zora looked at her steadily. "Did he ask about Ronan?" "He asked if Ronan was still there. I said he'd left before I arrived." A pause. "He believed me. Or he acted like he believed me, which with Victor is often the same thing." Ronan came in from the kitchen with his phone still in his hand. "Marcus accepted the meeting," he said. Zora looked up. "Tomorrow morning. He thinks it's a routine operational review. Weekly format, normal location, nothing to suggest I know anything." He set the phone face down on the table. "He'll come." She nodded. "Does he know I'm out of the hospital?" "Victor knows. Marcus therefore knows. And what does Victor think I'm doing right now?" Ronan pulled out the chair beside Sarah and sat. "Based on what Marcus has reported, and Marcus's information is still current as of this morning, his access to organizational channels is intact. Victor believes you're recovering, and that your legal response will take weeks to organize. He believes you don't have an attorney yet. He believes the estate documents are in a location his people can access if they move quickly." Zora looked at him. "That last part. The documents are where he thinks they are," Ronan said. "They're not alone," she understood. She didn't ask for details. "The federal inquiry," she said. "The tip Marcus filed. Where does that stand?" "The liaison my attorney spoke to is gathering documentation before deciding whether to formalize it. That process normally takes 2 to 4 weeks. He paused. "Victor's strategy requires it to move faster. He'll be pushing. Calling in contacts. Trying to accelerate the timeline so the inheritance freeze precedes any legal challenge you mount. How long do we actually have? 70 hours. Maybe less." She looked at the table. The 3 columns on her legal pad. The authorization memo with Victor's signature. "Then, here's what happens tomorrow," she said. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping. Ronan and Saras listened. Ronan asked 3 questions, all of them practical, all of them about logistics and timing. Sarah asked 1. What do you need from me specifically? I need you available, and I need Victor to believe you're still on his side until the moment I tell you otherwise. Zora looked at her. Can you do that? Sarah's jaw was set. I've been doing it for 8 months. 1 more day. 1 more day, Sarah confirmed. The plan was not elegant. Elegant plans required time and resources and the luxury of multiple attempts. What Zora had was 70 hours, a post-surgical body running on ibuprofen, and the single most dangerous asset available in any high-stakes confrontation, information her opponent didn't know she had. She intended to use all of it. That night, she sat in the living room of the Magnolia house, after Carol had settled Maya, and Ronan had taken a call in the back bedroom, and Sarah had gone to her own place to prepare. The room was quiet in the way houses are quiet when you're in them alone for the first time aware of themselves, slightly listening. She took off the outer layer of the professional armor she'd been wearing since waking up in the hospital and let herself feel for approximately 20 minutes, the full weight of what the past 48 hours had deposited. Her father had watched her, for years, from a distance. She had been observable but unreachable, a decision he'd made for her and then told himself was protection. She had grown up without a last name that meant anything, without a history that connected to anything larger than her own 2 hands, without the basic human inheritance of knowing where she came from. And the whole time, a man with a multi-billion-dollar empire and a garden planted with bulbs for a daughter he was too afraid to meet had been watching from the other side of the world. She was angry about it. She was also, underneath the anger, something more complicated that she didn't have a clean word for. Something that involved the understanding that Jun Seok, flawed man who made a catastrophic choice, and then spent the rest of his life trying to correct it from his distance, because actually correcting it would have required him to walk through a door and face what he'd done. She knew something about that. She had built her entire career on never walking through doors she wasn't certain she could handle what was on the other side of. The difference was that she'd kept walking anyway. She thought about that for a while. Then she stopped thinking about it, because 20 minutes was what she'd allocated, and she needed to sleep, and Maya would be awake in 3 hours, and tomorrow was going to require everything. She slept. She woke at 2:47 to Maya's voice, and she fed her daughter in the dark of the bedroom and sat with the weight of her in her arms and felt, underneath the pain and the exhaustion and the operational calculations running in the back of her mind, like a program that never fully closed, something that was simply and completely love. No conditions, no strategy, no cost-benefit. Just this. She put Maya down. She slept again. She was at the table by 6:15. Marcus Tay arrived at Ronan's operational office, a clean, legitimate-looking suite in a building in Sodu that served as the administrative front of several of the organization's business entities at 9:03 the following morning. He was 54 years old, Korean-American, with the compact efficiency of a man who had spent 11 years making complex problems disappear before they could become crises. He had a good face for the work, open, professional, the kind of face that people trusted on instant because it didn't perform trustworthiness. It simply presented as competent. He'd been with Ronan's organization longer than any other senior figure. He knew the shipping routes and the financial instruments and the shell structure and the names and the numbers that kept the whole apparatus functioning beneath the surface of its legitimate face. He also, Zora now knew, had been feeding Victor Hahn's attorneys a steady diet of exactly that information for 6 weeks. She was already in the conference room when he walked in. That was the first thing that was different from what he expected. He stopped in the doorway. His face did something quick, a flash of recalibration so fast that a less practiced observer would have missed it, and then he came in and sat down across from her with the ease of a man who had decided in approximately 1 second that the best response to surprise was the appearance of having anticipated it. "Miss Ellington," he said, "I didn't know you'd be joining us." "Ronan thought it would be a good opportunity to introduce us," she said. "Given my new role." His eyes moved to Ronan, who was sitting at the end of the table with a coffee in front of him and an expression that disclosed nothing. "Of course," Marcus said. "Congratulations on the baby, by the way." Ronan mentioned the delivery was complicated. "Everything worked out," she said. She let the silence sit for 3 seconds, just long enough to be slightly wrong. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "In your capacity as operations director, you have the broadest organizational overview of anyone currently on staff. That's accurate. Careful. Professional. What would you like to know?" "The documents," she said, "the estate records. The real medical assessments from June Seok's physicians. Ronan tells me they're secured off-site." She paused. "I want to move them. I'm not comfortable with the current location." Marcus's expression was exactly right. Attentive. Slightly concerned. The expression of a man hearing something sensible. "That seems prudent given." "Where would you recommend?" she said. "You know the organization's secure facilities better than anyone." He offered 3 options. All 3 of them, she noted, shared a characteristic. They were locations that could be accessed by someone with the right organizational credentials that Marcus possessed and could share with Victor's people without those people appearing on any external security log. She listened to all 3. She took notes on the legal pad in front of her. She asked clarifying questions about 2 of them, practical questions about access procedures, and she watched Marcus answer them with the specificity of someone who genuinely knew what he was talking about and was genuinely helping. And underneath all of it, she could see, just barely, the faint hum of calculation running. He thought he was winning. She let him think it for 4 more minutes. Then Ronan set his coffee down. That was the signal. The door opened behind Marcus, and a man came in and set a folder on the table in front of Zora. She opened. She looked at the top document long enough to confirm it was what she'd asked for. Then she turned it around and slid it across the table to Marcus. He looked down at it. It was a communication log. Encrypted messages between a handle she'd identified through Ronan's IT team as belonging to Marcus and a secure channel used by Victor Hahn's private legal team. 6 weeks of communication. Dates, timestamps, content summaries. The color didn't drain from Marcus's face. He was too controlled for that. But something went out of him, some animating current that had been running underneath the professional surface, and what remained was a stillness that was completely different from calm. He looked up from the document. He looked at Ronan. Ronan looked back at him with an expression that Zora had not seen on Ronan before. Not anger, not betrayal exactly. Something older and quieter and more final than either of those things. 11 years, Ronan said. Marcus said nothing. "I'm not going to ask you why," Ronan said. "I know why. I passed you over and you decided the organization's future was worth more to you than my judgment about what the organization was going to become." He paused. "I'm asking you one question. One. And I need you to answer it honestly. Not because I'm threatening you, but because what happens in the next 60 hours depends on it." He leaned forward slightly. "Has Victor's team filed the federal tip formally, or is it still in the preliminary documentation stage?" Marcus looked at the communication log. Then he looked at Zora. She looked back at him with an expression that said, "Answer the question." "Preliminary," Marcus said, "as of yesterday morning." The formal filing was scheduled for. He stopped. "For when?" she said. A pause. "Thursday. 48 hours. She wrote it down. "One more question," she said. "The witnesses for the competency challenge. The people Victor's attorneys have lined up to testify that June Seok was cognitively impaired. How many, and what's their relationship to Victor?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. She watched him calculate. She could practically see the variables, and then watched him arrive at the conclusion that the communication log on the table made cooperation the only rational position. 3 witnesses, he said. 2 are physicians Victor retained after June Seok died. They reviewed records selectively provided to them. They never treated the man. He paused. The 3rd is June Seok's former personal assistant. Victor has been providing financial support to her since the estate was filed. "Do you have names?" He gave her names. She wrote them down. "Okay," she said. She closed the legal pad. She looked at Marcus directly. "Here's what's going to happen now. You're not going to contact Victor. You're not going to contact anyone on his team. You're going to continue your normal operational communication through the organizational channels for the next 48 hours, and you're going to report exactly what I tell you to report. Marcus looked at Ronan. She has authority, Ronan said simply. Complete authority. If I do this, Marcus said, and Victor finds out, Victor is going to have considerably larger problems than whether you stayed loyal to him, Zora said. What you need to be thinking about right now is not Victor. It's the federal documentation you helped him assemble. She paused. Cooperate with me in the next 48 hours, and I'll have my attorney speak on your behalf regarding the extent of your cooperation. Refuse, and you're holding a communication log that places you at the center of an attempt to defraud a federal estate process and file a false criminal tip. Marcus was very still. That's not a threat, she said. It's a description of the situation, he nodded once. The nod of a man who has made his final calculation and doesn't like the number but recognizes it as the number. What do you want me to tell them, he said. She told him. For the next 4 hours, Marcus Tay fed Victor Hahn's attorneys a carefully constructed picture of Zora Ellington's collapse. The key witnesses supporting June Seichik's competency had apparently become unreachable. Zora's attempt to retain independent legal counsel had stalled. No prominent Seattle attorney would touch an inheritance case with syndicate allegations attached. The estate documents in their off-site location were, according to Marcus's report, moved to a facility due to Zora's distrust of the current setup, and the transfer window would create a brief period of reduced security. Victor received this information and made his move. He sent 3 men to the transfer facility. They arrived at 11:17 that night. The cameras were already running. Ronan's security team, not the criminal-facing arm, but the private security contractors he'd retained for legitimate corporate purposes, people whose work would be entirely defensible in a court of law, had been in position since 9 p.m. They documented everything: the approach, the entry attempt, the specific nature of the interference with what they believed to be estate documents in transit, license plates, faces captured on 3 different angles, the timestamp data that would connect this action to the competency challenge filing, to the federal tip, to the insurance authorization. Everything connected. Victor Hahn's 3-year architecture of careful deniability came apart in 47 minutes. Zora was at the Magnolia House when Ronan called her with confirmation. She was sitting at the table in the dark because she hadn't wanted to wake Maya by turning on the overhead light, and she had a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago, and a legal pad she'd been staring at without writing anything. When the call came, she answered it on the first ring. It's done, Ronan said. She breathed. All 3 vehicles on camera, he said. Entry attempt captured. The security team intervened before any documents were touched. Everyone present has been identified. A pause. My attorney has the footage. He's been in contact with your attorney, the one Sarah recommended. I have her name. Maya Barrett, Zora said. She received the footage 40 minutes ago. She's been awake. Another pause. Victor's people didn't know they were walking into it. He moved fast because he thought you were vulnerable. He didn't take the time he would normally have taken. Because she'd told him she was vulnerable. Because she'd looked exactly as overwhelmed as he expected. She sat in the dark and let herself feel the specific satisfaction of having correctly anticipated a powerful man's arrogance, and then she set it aside, because satisfaction was a luxury, and the next 16 hours were not done yet. The hearing, she said. Maya Barrett thinks we can move for an emergency session? Given the footage, given the circumstances, given that the competency challenge is scheduled for Friday morning anyway, she thinks the judge will see us Thursday afternoon. He paused. Zora, you'd be standing in front of a judge 3 days after a C-section. I'm aware. I'm not telling you not to. I'm telling you so you can decide. I've decided, she said. Get me the hearing. She ended the call. She sat for another moment in the dark. Then she picked up her phone again and called Sarah. Sarah answered on the second ring. She had been awake. Zora could tell from the quality of the silence on the other end the specific held-breath quality of someone who has been waiting. It worked, Zora said. A long exhale on the other end of the line. Thank God. Sarah caught herself. Sorry. Don't apologize, Zora said. He came after the documents? Yes, okay. Sarah's voice was steadier now. What do you need from me tomorrow? I need you available at 9 a.m. with your originals from the safety deposit box. I need you prepared to give a statement to my attorney. She paused. And Sarah said, what I'm about to ask you, I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. You don't have to say yes. Sarah waited. I'm going to need you to testify, Zora said. Not a written statement. In person. In front of a judge. Against your brother. A pause. What he did. What you documented. Why you collected it. You'd be burning that relationship to the ground permanently. Silence on the line. I burned it when I started collecting evidence, Sarah said quietly. I just hadn't told him yet. Are you certain? Are you certain? Sarah said. Zora looked at the legal pad in front of her. The 3 columns. The names Marcus had given her. The timestamps from the camera footage. The authorization memo with Victor's signature. Yes, she said. Then yes, Sarah said. I'll be there at 9. Thursday morning arrived with the specific gray of Seattle. In November, not dramatic, not storming, just persistently overcast. The kind of sky that suggested the city had more important things to think about than weather. Maya Barrett was 51 years old, had practiced estate law in King County for 23 years, and had the bearing of someone who had been underestimated in courtrooms so many times that she stopped noticing it and started exploiting it. She met Zora at her office at 9 a.m., looked at the document spread across the conference table, watched the camera footage twice, spoke with Safra for 40 minutes and Ronan for 20, and then made a series of phone calls that Zora was not in the room for. When she came back, she sat down across from Zora and said, "The judge will see us at 2 p.m." Zora nodded. "I want to be clear with you about something," Maya said. "The footage is strong. Sarah's documents are very strong. The witness names Marcus provided give us significant grounds to challenge the medical testimony on the competency claim." She paused. "What we don't control is the syndicate argument. Victor's attorneys are going to raise it. The judge is going to hear it, and however much we challenge it, there's a version of today where the judge decides this inheritance needs a deeper review before it can be released." "I know," Zora said. "We're going to address it directly," Maya said. "Not defensively. We're going to bring it out ourselves before they do. Explain the trustee structure, explain the 12-month wind-down clause, and make the argument that June Seok's design of the inheritance was specifically intended to end the criminal operations, not extend them." She looked at Zora carefully. "That argument only works if the judge believes you. Not your attorney, not the documents." Zora looked at her. "The judge may want to hear from you directly," Maya said. "If that happens, if she asks you to speak, I want you to tell me right now whether you can do that." Zora thought about what she'd gone through in the past 72 hours. The hospital, the insurance card that stopped working, Davis and his clipboard, the authorization memo, Victor's smile, the 40 seconds of silence after Maya was born, Marcus's face when he saw the communication log, the camera footage of 3 men walking toward a building in the dark. "I can do that," she said. Maya nodded once, satisfied. "Then let's go," she said. King County Superior Court at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday looked exactly like what it was, a place where people came when other options had run out. The hallway outside courtroom 14 smelled of old carpet and recycled air, and the particular institutional patience of a building that had been resolving disputes for decades and expected to be doing so for decades more. Zora walked in wearing a charcoal suit she'd asked Sarah to bring from her apartment, Maya in a sling against her chest because there was no one to leave her with, and also because she had made a decision, somewhere between the Magnolia's house and this hallway, that she was not going to perform a version of this moment that required pretending her daughter didn't exist. She was a mother. She was an heir. She was a woman 3 days out of surgery who had not slept more than 4 hours in any single stretch. All of that was true simultaneously, and she was not going to simplify it for a courtroom. Victor was already there. He was at the opposing table with 2 attorneys she didn't recognize, brought in from the look of them, the kind of retainer that cost enough to signal that the person paying didn't think about cost. He was wearing a dark suit, and his face was professionally composed, and when she walked in, he looked at her with an expression that lasted exactly half a second before he controlled it. She saw what was in it. He hadn't expected her to look like this. Upright, present, carrying her daughter and a legal pad, and 3 days of fury compressed into something that looked, from the outside, like calm. She sat down. Maya Barrett sat beside her and opened her briefcase. The judge entered. Honorable Sandra Okafor, 61 years old, 20 years on the bench, with the specific economy of movement that judges develop when they've heard every possible version of every possible argument and have stopped being surprised by human behavior. She looked at the room, settled herself, reviewed the preliminary documents, and looked up. "We're here on an expedited motion regarding the Han estate proceedings," she said. "Given the circumstances brought to my attention this morning, I'm allowing both parties to present. Ms. Barrett, you filed the emergency motion. You'll go first." Maya stood. She was precise, methodical, and devastating. She presented Sarah's documents, in order the employment interference first, then the financial sabotage, then the insurance authorization. She presented the 3-year timeline of Victor's systematic campaign to keep Zora financially destabilized. She presented the camera footage from previous night, the 3 men, the vehicles, the attempted interference with estate documents. She presented the names of Victor's expert witnesses and the timeline of their engagement with Victor's team, documenting that none of them had treated June Seok and that all 3 had received documents selectively provided by Victor's attorneys. And then she raised the syndicate argument herself, before Victor's attorneys could, and she made the case clearly, with the 12-month wind-down clause front and center that June Seok Han had designed his daughter's inheritance not to extend criminal operations, but to end them. Victor's lead attorney responded for 40 minutes. He was good. He made the syndicate argument with force and some precision. He challenged the camera footage's chain of custody. He questioned the provenance of Sarah's documents. Judge Okafor listened to all of it. Then she looked at the room over her glasses and said, "I'd like to hear from Miss Ellington." The room went quiet. Zora stood up. Maya was awake, in the sling, making the small alert sounds of a baby, looking around at a new environment, and Zora put one hand against her daughter's back not to quiet her, but because the weight of that small person was, in this moment, an anchor, and she looked at the judge and she said, "5 days ago, I didn't know my father's name." The courtroom was completely still. She stood in it and she told the truth. Not the legal version. Maya Barrett had already given the judge the legal version. She told the human version. She told it the way she'd lived it, a child who grew up without a last name that connected her to anything, who built every single thing she had from scratch, who arrived at a hospital in labor with her insurance suspended by a man who knew she was high risk and did it anyway. She told the judge what it meant to find out that your father had watched you from a distance for 23 years and never once walked through the door. She told the judge what it meant to understand at 34 years old with a 3-day-old daughter against your chest, that the people who claim to protect you and the people who try to control you are, sometimes in the most important ways, doing exactly the same thing. She did not perform emotion. The emotion was already there, present, and evident, and she didn't need to perform it. She told the judge that she wasn't asking the court to create a right for her. She was asking the court to recognize one that already existed. Victor's lead attorney, when she finished, opened his mouth and closed it again. Zora noticed. She didn't look at him long enough to give him the satisfaction of knowing she'd noticed. Judge Okafor looked at the documents in front of her for a long moment. Then she looked at Victor, "Mr. Han," she said. "The authorization document entered into evidence, the one bearing your digital signature, dated 11 days ago, suspending the claimant's health insurance during her 38th week of a high-risk pregnancy. Do you dispute its authenticity?" Victor's attorney leaned toward him quickly and said something low and urgent. Victor listened. Then he said, "No, Your Honor. We don't dispute its authenticity." A silence settled in the room. It was the silence of something ending. "The competency challenge," Judge Okafor said, relies on medical testimony from physicians who have now been documented as receiving selectively provided records and who had no treating relationship with the decedent. She paused. The attempt to interfere with estate documents last evening, captured on security footage, with traceable connections to vehicles, registered to entities with documented ties to Mr. Han's security firm, represents a significant breach of this proceeding's integrity. Another pause. I'm going to take a recess. She stood. Everyone stood. She walked out. The recess lasted 18 minutes. Zora sat at the table and did not speak, and did not look at Victor's side of the room. Maya Barrett sat beside her with her hands folded and her face neutral. Saras, seated in the gallery, was very still. Ronan was in the back of the gallery. He'd come in at the last minute. She'd felt him arrive without turning to look. She looked at the judge's empty chair, and she breathed, and she waited. The bailiff announced the judge's return. Judge Okafor sat down. She looked at her notes. She looked at the room. The competency challenge filed against the Han estate documents is rejected, she said. The medical evidence presented does not meet the evidentiary standard required, given the documented circumstances of its assembly. She paused. The estate documents are recognized as legitimate instruments of a mentally competent individual. The claimant's inheritance claim proceeds. Another pause. The attempted interference with estate documents last evening is formally entered into this record and referred to the appropriate authorities for review. She looked at Victor's table. Counsel for the respondent is advised that any further interference with these proceedings will be treated accordingly. She closed the folder in front of her. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound of it in that room at that moment was not dramatic. It was just a sound, a wooden sound, small and final. That meant the first part was over. Zora sat for a moment without moving. Maya made a small sound against her chest. She put her hand on her daughter's back. She had done it. She had not done it perfectly. Nothing about the past 72 hours had been perfect, and she was going to feel the physical cost of all of it for the next several weeks. But she had done it, and the inheritance moved forward, and the 12-month clock would begin the moment she formally asserted her claim. And Victor Han's 3-year campaign to keep her invisible had just been formally entered into the record of King County Superior Court. She became aware slowly that Maya Barrett was saying something to her. She turned her head. There's one more thing, Maya said quietly. Before we leave, you need to decide right now about Victor. Zora looked at her. His legal position has collapsed, Maya said. His challenge failed. The evidence tampering is on the record. The financial sabotage is documented. She paused. If you want to pursue full litigation against him, civil liability for 3 years of deliberate interference, criminal referral for the insurance authorization, the evidence tampering, you can. The case would be strong. Another pause. Or you can offer terms. Zora looked at the front of the room. Victor's attorneys were still at their table, talking in low, urgent tones. Victor was sitting very still, looking at nothing in particular. He looked like a man who had just realized that the architecture he'd spent 3 years building had been standing on a single false assumption about the person he was building it against. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like someone who did not have a plan. What kind of terms, she said. Maya laid it out in 4 clean sentences. Zora listened. She thought about Junseo Khan, planting bulbs in a garden for a daughter he couldn't face. She thought about a man who chose dynasty over love and watched from a distance for 23 years and tried to fix it in a will when he ran out of time. She thought about what destruction actually cost and what justice actually required, and whether those two things were the same. She looked at Victor one more time. Then she stood up, settled Maya against her chest, and walked toward the opposing table. Victor's attorney stopped talking. Victor looked up. His face was controlled. She'd give him that. Whatever he was feeling in this moment, and she imagined it was considerable, he was managing it. She respected the mechanics of it, even while knowing exactly what it cost him to sit there and look at her without flinching. I want to talk to you, she said. Just you, not them. His lead attorney started to object. It's fine, Victor said. The attorneys moved away. The two of them sat at the table, half-siblings, who had never spoken honestly to each other. in a courtroom where one had just lost and the other had just won. And Zora leaned forward slightly and said, quietly enough that no one else in the room could hear, I'm going to offer you terms, and I want you to listen to all of them before you respond. Victor looked at her. His eyes were the same shape as Jun Seok's eyes in the photograph she'd found online 3 days ago. She noticed this and set it aside. I'm listening, he said. She told him. His face moved through several things while she talked resistance, calculation, something that might have been relief dressed as pride. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question she'd been waiting for. Why, he said. You have everything you need to take all of it. She looked at him steadily. Because destruction and justice aren't the same thing, she said. And I know the difference. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Outside the courtroom windows, Seattle was still gray, still overcast, still going about its business, with the indifference of a city that had seen everything and would see more. Inside, the room was almost empty. Now the attorneys talking in corners, Sarah in the gallery with her hands pressed together, Ronan standing at the back with an expression she would need more time and a different moment to read. Victor Hahn looked at the table in front of him. He said yes. Victor Hahn said yes at 3:47 in the afternoon in a nearly empty courtroom in King County Superior Court, and the word came out quietly, without ceremony, the way words come out when a man has run out of alternatives and knows it. Zora looked at him for a moment after he said it. She was trying to read whether there was anything underneath the capitulation, whether the yes was tactical, the first move of a different strategy, the kind of agreement that holds long enough for the other party to relax before it dissolves. She was good at reading people. She'd built a career on it. What she saw in Victor Hahn's face was not strategy. It was exhaustion, the specific kind that arrives when you've been fighting something for so long that winning and losing start to feel like the same outcome, just arriving from different directions. She nodded once. My attorney will have the terms drafted by tomorrow morning, she said. Read them carefully. If there's language you want adjusted, tell her directly. Don't go through intermediaries, and don't contact me until you've spoken to her. She paused. And Victor, he looked at her. If you violate any part of this agreement, she said, I will use everything currently in that record to bury you. Not because I want to, because I will have no other option. Do you understand that? Yes, he said again. She stood. She settled Maya against her chest, picked up her legal pad, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, she stopped walking, leaned her back against the wall, and breathed. Just breathed. Maya made a small sound, a questioning sort of noise, someone who has been patient about being carried through a tense situation and is beginning to have opinions about it. Zora put her lips against the top of her daughter's head and stayed there for a moment. Sarah came out first. Then Maya Barrett, who paused, looked at Zora's face and said with the pragmatic efficiency of a woman who had seen a great many courtroom victories and understood their texture, Go home. Sleep. I'll call you when the draft is ready. She left without further commentary. Zora appreciated that. Ronan came out last. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't say anything immediately, which she had come to understand was one of his few reliable qualities, that he didn't perform reactions, didn't fill silence with sound just to fill it. You're in pain, he said. I'm fine, Zora. I said I'm fine. She pushed off the wall. I need to get Maya home. He walked her to the car. He didn't try to take anything from her or put his hand on her back or do any of the things that would have felt like management. He simply walked beside her at the same pace through the gray November afternoon and held the car door open when they reached it. She got in. He closed the door. She looked at him through the window for a moment. He looked back at her with an expression she didn't have a name for and wasn't going to try to name today. She told the driver to go. The settlement agreement took 31 hours to draft. Maya Barrett sent it to Victor's attorneys at 11 p.m. on Friday night, and they responded at 7 the following morning with 3 requested language adjustments, all of them minor, none of them changing the substance. Zora accepted 2 of the 3. The third, a clause that would have slightly limited her right to speak publicly about the circumstances of her inheritance, claims she struck without discussion. Victor accepted the amended version by noon. The terms were as she had outlined them in the courtroom. Victor retained his 58% controlling interest in Han Meridian Holdings. Zora received her full 42%, a seat on the board, some financial restitution for 3 years of documented sabotage, calculated at a number that had made even Maya Barrett's eyebrows move, and formal legal recognition as Jun Seo-khan's daughter and legitimate heir. In return, Zora agreed not to pursue civil litigation for the documented interference, not to make the specifics of Victor's campaign public, and not to seek criminal referral for the insurance authorization, provided that no further interference with her life, business, or family occurred. The evidence tampering referral from Judge Okafor's record was already in motion and outside anyone's ability to retract. That would proceed through its own process on its own timeline. Zora had not offered to do anything about that, and Victor had not asked her to. Some things you don't get to bargain away. She signed her copy of the agreement at her kitchen table in the Magnolia house, with Carol watching Maya in the next room, and the sound of her daughter's occasional commentary on the world drifting through the open door. She signed it with a pen she'd bought from a drugstore that morning, because she didn't have her own office yet, and her old ones were in an apartment she hadn't been back to in 5 days. She set the pen down. She looked at her signature on the page. She thought, "This is the least romantic moment of the most consequential thing I have ever done." She sent the signed copy to Maya Barrett. She made coffee. She sat in the kitchen of a house she didn't own, in a city that was still raining, with a daughter she hadn't planned, and a fortune she hadn't known about, and a half-brother she'd offered terms to, and a man she hadn't decided about yet. And she drank the coffee, and she looked out the window at the gray water of Puget Sound, visible between 2 buildings, and she thought about the woman who had arrived at Crescent Harbor Medical Center 6 days ago, with a bag packed 2 weeks in, advance and an insurance card that no longer worked. That woman had walked back toward the rain. She had not hit the pavement. 6 days. It felt like a different season. The formal inheritance claim was filed the following Monday morning by Maya Barrett on behalf of Zora Ellington in the matter of the estate of Jun Seo-khan. The clock started the moment the filing was time-stamped. 12 months. Ronan would have 12 months to dismantle the criminal organization that had been his professional identity for 11 years. He called her that afternoon. "It's filed," he said. "I know." Barrett's office confirmed. A pause. "I wanted you to hear it from me." She sat with that for a moment. "How does it feel?" she said. Not sarcastically. She genuinely wanted to know. Another pause, longer. Like standing at the edge of something without being able to see the bottom. He paused again, and deciding to step off anyway. "Are you going to do it?" she said. "All of it. Not partway. Not the pieces that are easy to cut and keeping the parts that aren't." "Yes," he said. "How can I know that?" "You can't," he said. "Not yet. You're going to have to watch." That was, she decided, the right answer. The only honest one. A promise to dismantle a criminal enterprise was the easiest thing in the world to say and a considerably more complex thing to demonstrate, and Ronan knew the difference between the two and wasn't pretending otherwise. "I'm going to watch," she said. "I know." She ended the call. The first board meeting of Han Meridian Holdings, that included Zora Ellington as a voting member, occurred 3 weeks after the settlement. It was held in a 32nd floor conference room in a downtown Seattle high-rise, with a view that would have been extraordinary on a clear day and was merely expensive-looking on a cloudy one. She came in 3 minutes early, set her materials down at the seat identified with her nameplate. Someone had already placed a nameplate, which she noted with the particular attention she gave to small signals about how power arranges itself, and looked at the room. 8 people around the table. 4 she knew by name from research. 3 she didn't. Victor was at the far end, in the chair that suggested authority without the nameplate saying so. He looked at her when she came in and gave her a small, controlled nod that contained approximately 30 different things, none of which she was going to try to unpack in a boardroom. She nodded back. She sat down. She had prepared for this meeting the way she'd prepared for every high-stakes presentation in her career, exhaustively, from the inside out, working from first principles rather than received wisdom. She had read every annual report, every subsidiary filing, every public-facing financial statement associated with Han Meridian Holdings for the past 8 years. She had identified 3 areas of operational inefficiency that were costing the company significant margin. She had identified one acquisition that had been proposed twice and rejected twice for reasons that, on close examination, appeared to have more to do with Victor's personal preferences than sound analysis. She had also prepared something else. When the meeting moved to new business, the portion of any agenda where the real work either happens or gets deferred, she put a single document in front of her and said, "I have a proposal I'd like to put on record." Victor looked at her. His expression gave away nothing. She presented the proposal. It was 2 pages, single-spaced, with 3 attached pages of supporting data. The substance of it was straightforward. A new admission policy for the Crescent Hospital Network, covering all 6 hospitals currently under the Han Meridian umbrella, requiring that any patient presenting with a genuine medical emergency be admitted and treated before insurance verification or financial clearance was completed. Treatment first, billing second. She did not make a speech about it. She laid out the policy, the implementation timeline, the projected financial impact, which was a cost, not a savings, and she didn't pretend otherwise, and the specific language she wanted in the network-wide directive. The room was quiet when she finished. One of the board members she didn't know, a man in his 60s who had introduced himself as James Park Financial, said, "The financial exposure from uncompensated care under this policy would be significant." "Yes," she said. "I've modeled 3 scenarios. The exposure ranges from manageable to challenging, depending on implementation details. The data is on the 3rd attached page." Park looked at the 3rd attached page. "You're proposing we absorb that as an operating cost." "I'm proposing that the network's operating model not include the option of turning away people who are having medical emergencies." She paused. "The current policy nearly resulted in the death of a patient 6 days ago. That patient is me. The child who almost didn't survive that night is my daughter. I'm not making this proposal because of that. I'm making it because the policy that allowed it to happen is wrong, and changing wrong policies is part of what a board seat exists to do." Another silence. Victor said, from the far end of the table, "I'll support the proposal." Several heads turned. He was looking at the table in front of him. He said it quietly, without particular emphasis, the way a man says something that costs him something and has decided to pay it anyway. The vote was 7-1. The one dissenting vote was Park, who was not wrong about the financial exposure, and who Zora made a note to speak with directly about implementation details. Because a dissenting vote, based on legitimate financial analysis, was more useful than a yes vote from someone who wasn't paying attention. The policy passed. Walking out of the boardroom afterward, Sarah fell into step beside her. They hadn't had a real conversation, not the kind that moves slowly and covers actual territory, since the morning in the hospital room, when Sarah had arrived with her messenger bag full of evidence. The events of the past 3 weeks had required a different kind of communication: fast, functional, transactional. "What needs to happen next and who does what?" "You okay?" Sarah said. "Ask me in 6 months. That's fair." They walked to the elevator. Sarah pressed the button. "He didn't fight the hospital policy." "I know, that's not nothing." "No," Zora agreed. "It's not," she paused. "It's also not forgiveness. It's one vote." She looked at the elevator doors. "I'm not going to confuse the two." Sarah nodded. The elevator came. They got in. "What happens now?" Sarah said. "With Victor. Long term." Zora thought about it. "We worked together badly for about a year. Then we work together less badly. Then eventually we find an operational rhythm that functions because we're both professionals who are capable of separating business from personal history when we need to." She paused. "And the personal history stays what it is. It doesn't go away. But it stops being the only thing in the room." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you actually believe? Or is that what you're aiming for?" "Both," Zora said. At the same time, the elevator opened. They walked out into the lobby. Outside the glass doors, Seattle was doing what Seattle does in December, not raining exactly, not clear exactly, occupying a meteorological middle ground that the city seemed to find perfectly acceptable. "What are you doing for Christmas?" Sarah said. Zora looked at her. "That's a strange question, is it?" Sarah's voice was careful. Not manipulative careful. The careful of someone who knows they're moving into territory that could go badly and is choosing to move there anyway. "I'm asking because Victor mentioned that Jun Seok's estate, the house, the property has been sitting empty since he died. And someone needs to go through it eventually. Not for inventory purposes." Just he stopped. "I've been going there by myself on Sundays." "I don't think I should keep doing that." Zora looked at the gray sky above the building across the street. A dead man's house. A garden planted with bulbs for a daughter he never met. "I'll think about it," she said. Sarah nodded. She seemed to understand that in Zora language, that particular formulation meant yes, probably. But I need to do it on my own terms and my own timeline, and I'm not going to be managed into it. They said goodbye in the parking structure. Driving back to the apartment she'd moved into the previous week, her own apartment, in her own name, with her own lease, because the Magnolia House had been a temporary refuge, and she didn't do temporary refuges, she thought about Jun Seok-han's garden. She thought about bulbs planted in autumn, things buried in cold ground that you can't see working, can't measure or track or verify, that you simply have to accept are doing something in the dark beneath the surface. Flowers that won't arrive until spring, long after the person who planted them has stopped being present to see them. She thought about what it meant to do something that you couldn't witness the outcome of. To act on faith not in any external entity, but in the simple forward motion of time. That the season turns. That buried things grow. Her father had been a man who did too many things at too great a distance. She was not going to romanticize that. She was not going to perform gratitude for a gesture made from the safety of absence. But she was also, she discovered, no longer interested in carrying the full weight of his failure. It was heavy, and she had other things to carry now. She pulled into the parking garage of her building, sat in the car for a moment, got out, took the elevator up, walked into the apartment, and found Carol on the living room floor with Maya doing whatever Carol and Maya did during the hours. Zora was not present, which appeared to involve a great deal of quiet commentary from Maya about the ceiling fan and a great deal of patient engagement from Carol. Maya looked at her when she came in. For a moment, just a moment, Maya's face did the thing it did sometimes. The searching thing, like she was trying to place the specific person in her limited but growing catalog of people. Then something resolved, and her expression shifted into the closest thing a 3-week-old has to recognition, and she made a sound that Zora was choosing to interpret as greeting. She picked her daughter up. "Hi," she said. Maya studied her with the complete seriousness of someone who has recently arrived and is still gathering data. "Long day," Zora told her. Maya appeared to reserve judgment. The call from Ronan came 2 days before Christmas, at 8 in the morning, while Zora was feeding Maya and reading a financial analysis of the Han Meridian shipping subsidiary she'd requested from the network's CFO. "I wanted to tell you something," he said, "before you hear it from anyone else." She set the document down. "Tell me." Marcus Tay's cooperation agreement with the Federal Review went through yesterday. He's providing full documentation of the syndicate's financial operations in exchange for reduced liability on his own involvement. He paused. The Federal Review will now have everything they need to accelerate the wind-down process. My attorney says the 12-month timeline may actually compress. Possibly 8 months. She listened to this. "Does that bother you?" A pause. "It's the right outcome, so no. Not the way you mean." Another pause. "It means moving faster than I planned on some of the restructuring. There are people in the organization who've been in it for a long time. Not decision makers, people who operated supply chains, handled logistics, thought they were working for a shipping company because functionally they were. They need options. Legal employment options. Yes. Han Meridian has 6 hospital networks, a shipping division, and a logistics arm," she said. "Several of which have open positions. Send me the list of people you're talking about, and I'll have the HR team review it." A silence. That's not charity, she said before he could respond. The logistics people know supply chain. The shipping people know maritime operations. These are transferable skills. She paused. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I don't hold the people at the bottom of a structure responsible for the choices made at the top. I never have. I know, he said. That's why I called you first. She was quiet for a moment. Maya had finished eating and was now conducting her dinner's post-meals inspection of Zora's face, reaching up with one small, uncoordinated hand toward her mother's chin. Ronan, she said. Yeah, how much of this, the syndicate, the legitimate businesses, the whole thing, how much of it did you actually want? Not what you inherited, not what you fell into. What did you actually want? A long pause, longer than usual. I wanted to be good at something that mattered, he said finally. And I was very good at this. And I told myself that was the same thing for a long time. He paused. It wasn't. She thought about that. What do you want now? She said. Another pause. To be useful in a different way. To whatever this becomes. A pause. If that's still on offer. She looked at her daughter's face. Maya had located Zora's chin and was gripping it with the focused satisfaction of someone who has achieved a specific goal. Come to the estate on Saturday, she said. Sarah and I are going. A silence? Victor? He said he'd come in the afternoon. You don't have to be there for that part. Okay, he said. It's not a reconciliation, she said clearly. I want to be direct about that. It's not I'm not ready for whatever we are or aren't. I don't know what that is yet, and I'm not going to pretend I do. I'm not asking you to. I know. She paused. But I'm not asking you either. I'm just asking you to be there. On Saturday. At the house. I'll be there, he said. The Jun Seok Han estate sat on a waterfront lot in a quiet stretch of shoreline north of the city, invisible from the main road, accessible through a gate that Sarah had the code to. It was not the largest property money could buy in the Pacific Northwest. Jun Seok had apparently not been interested in spectacle for its own sake, but it was quietly extraordinary in the way things are when the person who built them had very specific ideas about what they wanted and the resources to execute precisely. Sarah was already there when Zora arrived. On Saturday morning, her car parked just inside the gate, standing at the edge of what would have been a view of the water on a clear day, and was, on this particular December morning, a view of silver-gray water merging into silver-gray sky at a horizon you had to take on faith. They walked the property before going inside. This had been Sarah's suggestion, and Zora had not argued. She wanted to see the outside first. The garden. It was dormant the way gardens are dormant in December, the beds bare, the soil dark, the shapes of things suggested rather than present. Someone had maintained it after Jun Seok died. The edges were clean, the paths were clear, nothing had gone to ruin. Just waiting. In the center of the garden stood a Douglas fir so large that Zora had to take 3 steps back to see the top of it. Old. Genuinely old, not ornamental old, but actually old. The kind of old that predates the estate and the empire, and every argument happening in its shadow. The bark was deeply ridged under her palm when she put her hand against it, rough in the specific way of things that have been growing in one place for a very long time. She stood there for a moment. Sarah stood beside her. He used to sit out here, Sarah said, in the last year, when the weather wasn't too bad. Just sat. Didn't do anything. She paused. I thought it was the medication making him slow. Now I think he was doing something I didn't recognize. Zora thought about a man sitting in a garden he'd planted for a daughter he'd never met in the last months of his life, and what he might have been doing. Probably, she said, trying to figure out if there was still time. Sarah looked at the ground. There wasn't. No. Zora looked at the fir. But the bulbs are still there. They went inside. The house had Jun Seok's quality of intention in it, furniture that suggested a man who knew what he liked and had stopped caring about what that communicated to other people. Books in Korean and English mixed, without organization on the shelves. A kitchen that showed signs of actual use, not performance. In the hallway, one framed photograph of what appeared to be a coastline, the Korean coast, she thought, though she wasn't certain, and nothing else on the walls. In the small room off the main hallway that had been his study, on a desk that was otherwise bare, was a wooden box. The kind of box that would have looked at home in a different century. Sarah had found it in the first week after Junseok died and hadn't opened it until a month ago. She handed it to Zora. Zora opened it. Inside was a small collection of things that did not constitute a message, exactly, but that assembled into something that felt like one. 2 photographs, one of Zora Ellington, young, taken somewhere in Seoul, looking at something outside the frame, with an expression of complete absorption, the kind of photograph that catches a person when they've forgotten they're being looked at. One of a child of approximately 4 years old, with a face that Zora recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting, not with surprise, but with the particular quality of encountering something that is undeniably yours. The child was her. She looked at the photograph for a long time. There was also a letter. 1 page, handwritten, in English, that was careful and considered in the way of someone writing in a language they are fluent in but did not grow up with. It was not addressed to anyone. It did not begin with a name. It simply began, "I am a man who has given many gifts and used most of them poorly." She read it. She took her time. When she finished, she folded it and put it back in the box and closed the lid and stood there with her hand on top of it. She did not cry. Not because she was refusing to. She had cried in a hospital room 5 weeks ago without shame, but because what she felt in this moment was not the kind of thing that resolves into tears. It was more complicated than sadness. It was the feeling of receiving something too late that was nonetheless real, from someone who was gone and could no longer be held accountable or forgiven in the normal way, and having to decide what to do with it. She decided to keep the box. She decided to read the letter again, later, by herself without anyone watching. She decided that the photograph of the child who was her would go somewhere she could see it, because it was evidence of something she had always known without being able to prove, that she had existed, fully and completely, from the beginning, regardless of whether anyone with the power to say so had been willing to say so. She had always existed. Nobody had given her that. Ronan arrived at 11. He came through the gate on foot, which meant he'd parked outside and walked in, which she read as a choice not arriving with the weight of a car and a driver and the infrastructure of a man who controls things. Just walking in. He found them in the kitchen, where Sarah had discovered that Junseok had stock tea and was making a pot with the focused practicality of someone who needs something to do with her hands. He stopped in the doorway and looked at Zora, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Sarah said, "Tea?" and the moment reorganized itself into something more manageable. They sat at the kitchen table, 3 people with a complicated geometry between them, in a dead man's house, drinking tea in the gray December morning. Ronan set an envelope on the table. "From my attorney," he said. "The first formal step in the wind-down process. I wanted you to have a copy." She picked it up, looked at the cover page, put it down. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. Sarah looked between them with the expression of someone who has decided not to comment. "There's something I want to ask you," Zora said to Ronan. "And I want you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is that you don't know." He waited. "The past 5 weeks," she said. "Everything you did helping me get admitted, telling me the truth finally, staying through the hearing, the documents, all of it." She paused. How much of it was guilt, and how much of it was something else? He looked at his hands on the table, then at her. "Some of it was guilt," he said. "I'm not going to tell you it wasn't. I made decisions that cost you things, and I know that, and I'll know that for a long time." He paused. "But most of it," he stopped. Started again. "I sat in a back hallway of a hospital for 41 minutes while you were in surgery. I counted them. I didn't have anything to do with whether it went well. I had no function. I just waited." He paused. "That's not guilt. That's something else." She looked at him. "I know what it is," she said. "I know you do. I'm not ready to do anything about it yet." "I know that too." She nodded. "Okay," she said. That was all it needed to be right now. Victor arrived at 3 in the afternoon, as he'd said he would. He came through the gate and walked the path to the front door with the careful deliberateness of a man who is going somewhere he has decided to go and is not going to pretend the decision was easy. He was not wearing the suits he wore in boardrooms. He was wearing ordinary clothes, and it made him look, for the first time since she'd met him, like a person rather than a position. Sarah opened the door. They looked at each other for a moment, the two of them, brother and sister, who had been circling whatever this was between them for 4 months, and then Sarah stepped back and let him in. He came into the hallway, stopped when he saw Zora. She looked at him. She had spent a great deal of time in the past 5 weeks being angry at Victor Hahn. And the anger was still there. She was not going to perform its absence, but it had changed in quality. Less sharp, more specific. The anger of someone who understands exactly what was done to them, exactly why, and has made a conscious choice about what to do with it going forward. She had not forgiven him. She was not going to claim she had. But she had made a decision in a courtroom, and the decision stood, and she had meant it, and meaning it required being here. "The garden," she said. "Come look at the garden." He followed her outside. The 4 of them stood in the dormant garden in the December afternoon. Zora and Victor and Sarah and Sonan, arranged in the loose configuration of people who share a complicated history and are not yet certain what shape it will take going forward, and looked at the bare beds and the old tree and the gray water beyond the property's edge. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Victor said quietly, to no one in particular, "He came out here every Sunday." Sarah looked at him. "In the last year," Victor said. "I thought he was. I thought the illness was making him sentimental. I didn't ask him about it." He paused. "I didn't ask him about a lot of things. Nobody offered him absolution for that. Nobody said it was okay or understandable or that regret was enough. The silence simply held it, the way the garden held the winter, without judgment, without rush." Zora crouched down beside one of the flower beds. The soil was dark and cold. She pressed 2 fingers into it, just below the surface, feeling for something she couldn't see. There, barely a centimeter down, a firmness. The resistance of something with a specific shape buried in all that formless cold. A bulb. She stood up, brushed the soil off her fingers. "They'll bloom in spring," she said. Nobody needed to respond to that. It was just true, the way some things are simply true, and saying it out loud was enough. Later, after Sarah made more tea, and they went back inside and sat in the living room with the uncomfortable but genuine quality of people who are learning to be in the same room without armor, Zora took Maya out of the carrier and held her up in the gray light from the window and looked at her daughter's face. Maya looked back with the serious, searching expression she'd been perfecting since birth. She would know, Zora decided in that moment. All of it. The beautiful parts and the ugly parts and every complicated middle part. She would know where she came from, the Korean grandmother she would never meet. The Black American grandmother who had loved her own daughter with everything she had and not been given enough time. The great-grandfather who planted bulbs in a garden he was too afraid to invite anyone into until it was too late. She would know the empire and the shadow beneath it, and the year it took to dismantle the shadow. She would know about the man who caught her mother on a sidewalk, and the one who built a campaign to destroy her before she could claim what was hers, and the woman who decided that destruction and justice were not the same thing and meant it enough to act on it. She would know all of it, because knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be frozen by a Zion judge or suspended by an authorization memo, or stolen by someone who needed you to be smaller than you were. Zora had learned that the hard way. She intended to give her daughter the easier version. On the way out, at the gate, she stopped and looked back at the property one more time. The house, the garden, the old tree, the bare beds with their invisible cargo of buried things waiting. She thought about her mother. Celeste Ellington, who had come home from Seoul with a pregnancy she hadn't planned, and a story she'd chosen not to tell, and a lifetime that ended too soon, who had given her daughter, in the 9 years they had together, exactly enough to build on. Not safety, not comfort, not a last name that connected to anything larger. Just the understanding that you could survive things. That surviving was not the ceiling. That what you did after surviving was the thing that mattered. Zora looked at the bare garden one more time. She opened the gate. She walked through. Behind her, the gate swung shut with a sound that was not dramatic, just a latch catching. A small mechanical certainty, The sound of something closed that had been open long enough and could now be whatever it needed to be next. She had entered the story as a woman whose insurance card had stopped working in the middle of a storm. She left it as something she didn't have a single clean word for, because the word would have needed to contain mother and heir and strategist and daughter and half-sister, and the woman who had looked at everything she could have destroyed and chosen differently. She was none of those things completely. She was all of them simultaneously. And every choice, from this morning forward, was entirely hers. She put her hand on top of Maya's head, feeling the small warmth of her daughter's skull against her palm, and she walked to the car and she did not look back again. The garden would bloom in spring. She did not need to watch it to know that it would.